You know, when you hear the words climate change, your mind probably jumps straight to the science, right? Graphs, temperature spikes, all that data. But today, we're going to flip that on its head. Because the climate crisis, it's not just an environmental issue. At its very core, it's a social crisis. So let's shift our perspective a little and really dive into why the human side of this is the most important part of the story.
Yeah, we've all seen that image, right? The lonely polar bear on a tiny piece of melting ice. And look, it's powerful for sure, but it kind of misses the main point. It makes the problem feel like it's happening way out there, somewhere in the wild. But the real story? Well, it's a lot closer to home.
And that right there is the heart of it. The most immediate, the most devastating impacts, they're felt by people. It's about entire communities being uprooted, families being forced to leave behind everything they've ever known, all because their home environment just can't sustain them anymore.
And let's be clear, this isn't some far-off future problem. It is happening as we speak. This term, climate refugee, it gives a name to the millions of people who are already facing this reality. It's a human, social consequence born from a huge environmental shift.
Okay, so to really get a grip on the social impact, we do need a quick, clear look at the science behind it all. Let's just get grounded in the reality of what's actually happening to our planet.
So the core of the whole issue is global warming. And look, the scientific community is pretty much in complete agreement on this. The planet's average temperature is going up, and it poses a massive threat to all of us. But how does it actually work?
Well, it's a pretty straightforward chain reaction. First, our modern world runs on burning fossil fuels, oil, coal, and gas. Second, doing that releases a ton of greenhouse gases. And third, those gases build up and act like a giant blanket around the Earth, trapping heat and warming everything up.
And this is where the rubber meets the road. These are the real-world results we can actually see and feel. We're talking about sea levels rising and threatening coastal cities, natural disasters like hurricanes and wildfires getting way stronger, major disruptions to food supplies, and yet, as we already said, people being forced from their homes.
Now here's a concept that's, well, it's a little scary, but it's so important to understand. It's called a positive feedback loop. Basically, it means the warming we've already created can kick off other natural events that cause even more warming. For instance, think about the Arctic. As the bright white ice melts, it uncovers the dark ocean underneath. That dark water absorbs way more sunlight and heat, which, you guessed it, melts even more ice. It's a vicious cycle that can really start to spin out of control.
All right, so we've got the science down. We understand the what. But the bigger, maybe tougher question from a social angle is why? Why is this happening? To get to that answer, we have to look beyond just the emissions and dig into how our societies are actually structured.
It all really boils down to our collective environmental footprint. Think of it as the sum total of all the natural resources it takes to support our way of life. And the simple truth is, right now, our demand is way bigger than what the planet can sustainably supply.
And if you want a really powerful way to picture this, look no further than Earth Overshoot Day. Imagine the Earth has a budget of natural resources for the entire year. This day marks the exact date we've used up that whole budget. Everything after that, we're basically living on an ecological credit card, borrowing from future generations. And the scary part is, that date keeps getting earlier and earlier each year.
So what's driving this? Well, it's a whole mix of things that are woven right into our social fabric. We're talking about population growth, economies built on nonstop consumption, cultural values that tell us more stuff equals more happiness, and even things we don't often think about, like the huge resource drain of military activities around the globe.
So to dig even deeper into that why, we can actually use three really powerful tools from sociology. Think of them as different pairs of glasses that let us see the hidden social dynamics of the climate crisis in a totally new light.
So the first lens is called structural functionalism. Now it sounds super academic, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It sees society as one big complex system, kind of like an ecosystem. Every part is connected. So when we damage the environment, that disruption doesn't just stay in one place. It creates ripples that can shake our economy, overwhelm our healthcare, and threaten our social stability.
All right, our second lens, conflict theory, asks a completely different and much sharper question. Who benefits from this? This perspective zeroes in on power, inequality, and profit. It argues that environmental problems often aren't just an accident. They are the result of powerful groups putting their own financial interests above everything else.
And this leads us straight to a huge idea: environmental injustice.
This is the simple, brutal fact that the bad stuff, like pollution, toxic waste sites, the worst impacts of climate change, it's not shared equally. It almost always hits marginalized and poorer communities the hardest, the very people with the least power to stop it.
I mean, this slide just lays it out in black and white, doesn't it? Conflict theory shows us a system where the benefits, like corporate profits, flow to a small, powerful group, while the costs, like sickness and losing your home, are forced onto the most vulnerable among us.
Okay, our third and final lens is called symbolic interactionism. This one is all about culture. It looks at the words we use, the symbols we see, the stories we tell ourselves about the environment. It asks, how do all of these things shape what we believe and how we act?
A perfect example of this, and you've definitely seen this before, is greenwashing. This is when a company spends a boatload of money on advertising to look super eco-friendly, all while their actual business practices are anything but. They're using green symbols and language to manipulate our perception, often without making any real change.
So, looking at the crisis through these different lenses is a lot. It can feel pretty overwhelming, but it all leads us to the most important question there is. What in the world do we do about it? Let's take a look at the way forward.
And here's the good news. Real change can happen on every single level. It comes from activists on the ground demanding action. It comes from education and spreading awareness. It definitely comes from governments making smart policies and investing in renewable energy. And yes, it also comes from the everyday choices each of us makes about what we buy and how we live.
You know, this quote just nails it, doesn't it? It perfectly sums up everything we've been talking about. The climate crisis is, at the end of the day, a human story. It's about people, it's about power, and it's about the countless choices we all make every single day.
And that brings us to the final, really critical question. This is the big debate at the heart of this entire conversation. We know we need action at all levels, but where does the real responsibility lie? How much does it come down to our individual choices versus how much depends on massive systemic change from governments and corporations? There's no easy answer here, but it's the question we all need to be asking ourselves.